Okay, and next we're going to talk about heuristics, which are called these simple rules of thumb that make us smart. And for example, what we previously talked about, so protecting your downside and opening up the upside, that could be a decision-making heuristic if you were to use that to base it on your context for some more specific decisions. But let's see what we mean by these heuristics. So here are some readings for this week, and the basic idea of a heuristic is that it's this simple rule that doesn't use all the information that's available. And this is important because in this in particular context that we will see next, you might not want all the information. And there's a very long research tradition on this that sort of runs counter to the idea that we have these decision-making biases that somehow are irrational and misleading because they sometimes cause us to act in wrong ways. So, for example, loss aversion has been is this a famous cognitive bias? That's it being called, but loss aversion can be very reasonable if you're in a situation where you don't want to die, for example. And at this point, from a chapter in the book Ecological Rationality that I mentioned at the beginning of this section, starts with a quote of Herbert Simon, who is a pioneer in artificial intelligence and cybernetics. So it says that in a world in which information is relatively scarce and where problems for decision are few and simple, information is almost always a positive good. So when there is not a lot of information and the decisions you make are quite simple, you want to get as much of that information as possible to make the best possible decision. But in a world where attention is a major scarce resource, information may be an expensive luxury, or it may turn our attention from what is important to what is unimportant. We cannot afford to attend to information simply because it is there. So if you have these uncertain environments that are changing constantly and where information is abundant, so we have all these different media, for example, and different people who are connected to us and our organization and so forth, who want to proceed with their own goals, and we have all these machine learning algorithms and all of that, and it produces amazing amounts of information. And in such a world, you don't want all the information. If you would get all the information, it would be already too late to make the decision because it takes such a long time, and also much of the information is just misleading. So to think about what is the information that we actually want to use, we need to think about first of all uncertainty. So uncertainty is a term that's sometimes contrasted with risk in the literature, but the risk in this sense means something else than what we normally mean when we talk about risks in our everyday life. So the difference between risk and uncertainty in the literature is that the risk is something that can be measured. And so you get the probability of an event happening and multiply that by the impact of that event happening. But uncertainty is more fundamental. There's also a nice book called by John Kay called Radical Uncertainty, where he talks about the uncertainty and radical uncertainty, especially in these terms that the perfect foresight is impossible and unfeasible because there is just too much going on. And so this is part of this course that I took recently. It's quite a nice course. It's a bit expensive, so you might want to have your employer pay for it. But they also, in the New England Complex Systems Institute, they also arrange courses for online courses for students that are more affordable. But the point about the VUCA is that this is a term that's been going on for a couple of decades in the corporate lingo, and it's now making its way to science and the public sector finally. But the point is that there are these environments that are volatile, so they change rapidly, and they are uncertain. You don't have predictive capacity to understand them and predict in these environments. You have complexity, which kind of also encompasses all of these factors, but what's not here, but complexity is the interconnectedness of the different components of the system. And ambiguity means that you basically can look at the data and come to completely different conclusions than another person who looks at the same data. Because there are the same data can mean a lot of things, and we need these sense-making processes to actually make sense of the data in order to act in the world. So next concept is ecological rationality. So this is the study of the environmental conditions under which a given strategy performs better than others. So when we were delivering a course to civil servants about behavioral and systems insights in public policy, this is something we very much emphasize, that context is king. And so you might have a very nice communications campaign, for example, but the context, you need to know which context it's going to happen in order to know whether it's going to make things better or worse. And a heuristic now is a process of decision making under uncertainty. So you ignore some of the less important information in order to make decisions more quickly and with less errors. And so this heuristics generally work when you have these cues that are more important than most of the other information combined. So a smart heuristic is a heuristic that is used in the situations in which it is ecologically rational, as we just defined. And finally, the adaptive toolbox is the repertoire, all your responses that you have available to you, or your team or your organization for of these heuristics for making decisions. So one of the main points is that the heuristics can outperform these very, very complex strategies and algorithms that take into account all the information in particular environments. And so a heuristic in itself, it's not good and it's not bad, it's not rational and it's not irrational, in contrast to how these cognitive biases are usually talked about. So the accuracy of the heuristic depends on where it's being used. And importantly, a heuristic is not a slogan. So just repeating a sort of rule of thumb doesn't make it give you better decision-making capabilities. And an important thing also to note is that when decisions are made in organizations, it involves heuristics because the assumptions of these very complicated procedures that are often promoted. The underlying assumptions generally don't hold when you have these VUCA type of environments. So an example of a heuristic is the hiatus heuristic, which is, it basically says that if you're a company selling products or an NGO collecting donations for charity or something, it means that you have this one rule. So if my customer hasn't bought the product for 6 months, or whatever time frame is reasonable, we consider them inactive, and if they have, we consider them or if if this person hasn't donated money for the last 10 months or something, then we consider them inactive donator, and otherwise we call them an active donator who might not need the same kinds of communications as the others. And so using this simple rule has produced better forecasts for future sales or donations than very complex decision-making models, which take into account all the information you have about your customers. And 1/n heuristic is this idea of not putting all your eggs in the same basket. So you take so you have basically n number of places to put money into. So if you have 10,000 euros or dollars, you instead of putting 10,000 euros or dollars into one project, you can put 1,000 in 10 projects, or you can put 100 euros or dollars in 100 project. So in this sense, you're diversifying. This is good in some situations. It's not good in some other situations, and then there are situations which we will talk about when we will talk about risk management, where you can't really diversify your exposure. For example, with climate change, we can't just diversify humanity into 10,000 different planets, and then no matter if we destroy one of them. But we will talk about that in a little bit more. So for now, remember the phrase that having all your eggs in different baskets, it doesn't help if all the baskets are on board of the Titanic, which is a nice phrase coined by Raphael Duadi.